The deep space salvage vessel Odyssey's Call hung in the silent blackness, a tiny speck of light and life against an infinite dark. Its hull was a patchwork of repaired plates and scorch marks, a testament to a long career of picking at the bones of dead ships. Inside, the air smelled of recycled oxygen, machine oil, and coffee. On the bridge, Captain Linda Perez watched the main screen with tired eyes. The wreck ahead was like nothing she had ever seen. It was massive, a twisted sculpture of dark metal and what looked like shattered crystal. It did not have the hard angular lines of human ships. Instead, it swept and curved in ways that seemed unnatural, now frozen in their death throes. Long scars from some terrible weapon raked across its surface, and pieces of the hull drifted away like leaves from a dead tree. "Anything on the scopes, Kyle?" Linda's voice was calm and level. At the sensor station, Kyle leaned forward, his brow furrowed. He was a practical man, his hands more used to gripping tools than holding a data pad. "Nothing active, Captain. No engine glow, no power signatures. It's a ghost, but..." He tapped the screen, his finger tracing a faint flickering line. "I'm getting a single low-level life sign. It's weak, but it's there, deep inside in what might be a central core section. A single life sign. That changed everything. This was not just a salvage run anymore. It was a rescue or a recovery." Linda made her decision. "All right, people. We go in quiet and careful. Kyle, you're leading the EVA team. Take Amanda with you. If that life sign is something we can help, she's our best shot." Amanda, the ship's xenobiologist, looked up from her station. She was younger than most of the crew, her face still holding an openness the others had lost to the years of hard travel. The thought of a possible first contact, of finding something alive in all this death, sent a thrill of nervous energy through her. Soon, Kyle and Amanda were in the airlock, checking each other's heavy environment suits. The suits were white and bulky with bright lights on their shoulders and helmets. Frank, the ship's chief engineer, gave Kyle's oxygen tank a final solid thump with his fist. "You bring my girl back in one piece, you hear?" Frank said, his voice a low rumble. He had a soft spot for Amanda, seeing her as the daughter he never had. Kyle gave a short nod. "No sightseeing, Frank, in and out." The airlock door hissed open and the two figures drifted into the void, tethered to the Odyssey's Call by thin, strong lines. They moved toward a great tear in the alien ship's hull, a wound that led into darkness. Inside, the world was strange and wrong. The gravity was gone and they floated through wide corridors. The walls were smooth and organic, not made of flat panels but shaped like the inside of a seashell. Strange symbols, elegant and flowing, were etched everywhere, and there were bodies. The aliens were tall and slender, with long limbs and dark chitinous skin that looked like insect shell. Their faces had large, black, multifaceted eyes, now dull and empty. They floated in the stillness, surrounded by globules of frozen dark fluid. Amanda felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. This was a graveyard. "They're all gone." Kyle's voice crackled over the suit radio, grim and final. Whatever happened here, it was fast and nasty. They pushed deeper, following the signal on Kyle's wrist-mounted scanner. The further they went, the more the scene changed. They found a different kind of corridor. This one was warmer, the walls a softer, almost wood-like material. And here they found other bodies. These were different. They were larger, built for power. One was slumped against a doorway, its fur a deep tawny gold matted with something dark. It had a strong feline face with short, sharp horns curling back from its brow. Its hand, which had thick claws, was resting on the body of another similar being, as if trying to protect it even in death. "Two different species," Amanda whispered, her voice full of wonder and horror. "Or different types of the same one? These bigger ones look protective." Kyle pointed his light at the door. It was a heavy, shielded hatch, but it had been torn open from the inside. The metal around the lock was bent outward, as if something incredibly strong had forced its way out. "The life sign is coming from in there," Kyle said, his hand resting on the plasma cutter attached to his suit. "Get ready for anything." They drifted inside, their helmet lights cutting bright cones through the dark. The chamber was circular with soft, moss-like material covering the floor. There were simple nest-like beds and carved toys floating gently in the zero gravity. It was a nursery, and in the far corner something moved. It was small, curled into a tight ball. As the light touched it, it flinched and looked up. It was a smaller version of the large beings outside. Covered in soft, smoky gray fur, it had darker, shadowy rosettes scattered across its back and sides. Two small, nub-like horns, barely more than bumps, sat above its eyes. Its face was young and round, but its eyes were a bright, piercing gold, and they shone with a feral light. It was a child. A cub. The cub saw the two giant, white-suited figures, and its fear turned to defiance. It uncurled, bearing a mouth full of tiny, needle-sharp fangs. It planted its feet on the soft floor, its tail lashing back and forth. A low, rumbling growl echoed in the small chamber, a sound that seemed far too big and dangerous for such a small creature. Amanda's breath caught in her throat. All her training, all her theories about first contact, vanished. She didn't see an alien monster. She saw a terrified, orphaned child, surrounded by the bodies of its parents, putting on a brave face against the unknown. "She's just a cub," Amanda said, her voice soft and full of pity. Kyle kept his hand on his tool, but he did not raise it. He saw the same thing Amanda did. The small creature was shaking, its brave display a thin mask for its utter terror. It was alone, the last one left in a giant metal coffin. "What do we do?" Kyle asked, his voice low. Amanda slowly, carefully reached up and unlocked the seals on her helmet. There was a hiss of equalizing pressure. "Amanda, no!" Kyle warned. "She needs to see a face," Amanda said, pulling the helmet off. Her brown hair floated around her head in the zero gravity. She looked at the cub, her own face open, trying to show no threat. She ignored the cold air and the strange smells. The cub stopped growling, its golden eyes wide with confusion. It had never seen a being like this, with smooth skin and kind eyes. The giant thing had taken off its hard shell to show a soft, vulnerable face. Amanda slowly reached into a pouch on her suit and pulled out a high-energy nutrient bar. She broke off a small piece and gently tossed it so it floated towards the cub. The cub sniffed the air, its nose twitching. It looked at the food, then at Amanda's face, then back at the food. Hunger won over fear. It snatched the morsel from the air and gulped it down. It was a small gesture, a tiny piece of food, but in that moment, on the edge of a terrible tragedy, it was a bridge. The Unbreakable hunter had been found, and the first thread of a new pack had been spun. The return to the Odyssey's call was a quiet, tense journey. The small alien cub, now sedated for her safety and theirs, was secured in a portable quarantine pod. Amanda never left its side, her hand resting on the clear plastic viewport as Kyle guided them back through the derelict's eerie corridors and into the familiar airlock of their ship. The hiss of repressurization was a welcome sound. As the inner door slid open, the crew gathered, their faces a mix of curiosity and deep concern. Captain Linda Perez stood at the front, her arms crossed. "Report," she said, her eyes fixed on the pod. "We found her alone, Captain," Kyle said, his voice heavy with the memory. "The only survivor. The rest. It's a tomb in there." Amanda stepped forward. "She's just a child, Linda. Her people, the ones who looked like her, they died protecting that room. We can't just leave her." Frank, the engineer, pushed his way to the front. He looked down at the small, furry form sleeping inside the pod. Her chest rose and fell in a slow, steady rhythm. "Well, I'll be," he muttered, his rough voice softening. "She's no bigger than a minute." The debate began right there in the bay. Some of the crew, like the communications officer, voiced the obvious fears. She was an unknown. She could carry pathogens. Her biology could be a threat. What if her people were hostile? What if she was dangerous? Amanda argued back with a passion that surprised everyone. "Look at her. She's scared and alone. Are we the kind of people who leave a child to die in the dark?" She looked at Frank, at Linda, appealing to their humanity. Captain Perez was quiet for a long time, weighing the risks. Her ship, her crew were her responsibility, but her conscience was too. Finally, she gave a single sharp nod. "We'll keep her in full quarantine in the med bay. Amanda, you're in charge. Full biosafety protocols. We learn what we can. We help her if we can. But everyone stays alert." The first few days in the med bay were difficult. When the cub woke in the sterile white room, she panicked. She threw herself against the clear walls of the isolation unit, her claws scratching at the unyielding surface. She growled and hissed, her golden eyes wide with terror. She would not eat the food paste Amanda offered, turning her head away with a stubborn snarl. Amanda did not force her. She simply sat on the other side of the clear wall for hours, talking in a soft, calm voice. She read from data pads. She described the stars outside. She just made her presence a quiet, non-threatening constant. She started calling her Leah, a simple, gentle name that felt right. The breakthrough came on the third day. Frank, who had been watching from the doorway, disappeared and returned a few minutes later, with a small piece of cooked chicken from the mess hall. He held it up to Amanda. "Maybe she's a meat eater. Look at those teeth." Amanda took the chicken and, using the small access port, slid it into the isolation unit. The scent hit Leah immediately. Her head snapped around. Hunger and instinct warred with her fear. Slowly, cautiously, she crept forward. She sniffed the meat, then snatched it and devoured it in 2 quick bites. She looked at Amanda, then at Frank, her expression less hostile, more curious. From that moment, a slow trust began to build. Frank started visiting regularly, always with a small offering of food. He would sit on the floor outside her unit, his large frame looking comical next to her small one, and talk to her about engine diagnostics and faulty wiring. Leah seemed to find the low rumble of his voice comforting. After a week of clean bioscans, they cautiously allowed Leah out of the isolation unit into the larger med bay. She was hesitant, exploring the room with a delicate, stepping grace. She was a Cathar, they learned. Amanda had managed to access some of the data from the derelict's surviving logs, piecing together fragments of language and culture. Her people were hunters, known for their physical strength and, more importantly, their deep familial pack bonds. The larger beings with her were her parents. The derelict ship had been a refugee vessel, fleeing a destroyed world, only to be hunted down and slaughtered by the Crawl, the insectoid species whose bodies filled the halls. Leah was not just the last of her crew. She was possibly the last of her kind. This knowledge settled over the crew of the Odyssey's Call, changing their view of her. She was no longer just a strange alien. She was a living tragedy. The human instinct to protect, to nurture, kicked in with full force. The ship, a collection of rough spacers, became her surrogate pack. She followed Amanda everywhere, a small, quiet shadow. She learned to recognize the crew's names and faces. She seemed to understand the concept of work, and would sit quietly in a corner of the engine room, watching Frank with intense focus as he repaired machinery, as if she were learning a vital skill. One afternoon, Kyle was running a combat simulation on the training deck. Leah, who had been watching from the doorway, padded silently into the room. She watched his movements, the way he dodged and aimed. When the simulation ended, she walked over to a discarded piece of packing foam, pounced on it with startling speed, and tore it to shreds with her claws and teeth. She then looked up at Kyle, her head tilted. Kyle couldn't help but laugh. "Yeah, kid. Something like that." She was learning from them, and they were learning from her. They learned she was incredibly strong for her size, and her senses were far sharper than their own. She could hear conversations through closed doors and smell the food in the mess hall long before they could. She was playful too. She loved to chase the reflections from Frank's laser calibrator, and she had a particular fondness for the soft, fuzzy socks that Amanda wore. Weeks turned into a month. Leah was no longer a prisoner or a patient in the medbay. A small, soft bed was made for her in the corner of Amanda's quarters. She ate her meals in the mess hall, sitting on a chair with a booster cushion Frank had rigged for her. She was part of the crew. One evening, the ship was hit by a sudden and violent gravity wave from a nearby pulsar. The Odyssey's Call shuddered violently and red emergency lights flashed. Alarms blared. Leah, who had been sleeping on Amanda's bed, was thrown to the floor. She let out a sharp cry of fear. Amanda, bracing herself in a doorway, reached for her. "It's okay, Leah. It's okay." But Leah was not looking for comfort. She scrambled to her feet, her fur standing on end. She braced her legs wide, her claws digging into the deck plating for grip. She let out a low, steadying growl, not of fear but of defiance against the shaking ship. She was riding out the storm, just like the rest of her pack. When the shaking stopped, she walked over to Amanda and leaned against her leg, a soft rumble purring in her chest. Amanda picked her up and held her close. She was just a cub, but she was adapting. She was learning to be unbreakable. She had found her new pack, and for the first time since the horror of the derelict ship, she seemed to feel safe. The Odyssey's Call drifted near a large, mineral-rich asteroid, a silent gray rock against the star-filled black. It was a routine stop, a chance to restock raw materials for the ship's fabricators. The mood on the ship was calm, almost domestic. In the mess hall, Frank was showing Leah how to play a simple game involving a shiny metal bearing and 3 cups. The cub watched his large, calloused hands with intense focus, her golden eyes tracking the moving cup. On the bridge, Captain Linda Perez monitored the operation. Kyle was down in the cargo bay, overseeing the mining drones. Amanda was in her lab, analyzing a plant sample from their last planetfall. Everything was normal. It was a quiet day. That was the problem. The quiet never lasted. The alarm screamed through the ship, a harsh electronic wail that shattered the peace. Red lights flashed, painting the corridors in pulses of emergency light. "Contact," yelled the sensor officer. "Unidentified vessel. It just dropped out of warp right on top of us." Linda was on her feet. "Shields! Everyone to battle stations!" But she was too late. A searing green beam of energy lanced from the dark shape on the screen and slammed into the Odyssey's call. The ship shuddered violently and the lights flickered. A second impact hit, and this one was followed by a sickening crunch from the lower decks. They were being boarded. "Crawl signatures," the officer shouted, his voice tight with fear. "They're in the cargo bay." The Crawl. The name was a cold dread in Linda's stomach. They were the scourge of this sector, a ruthless species of raiders, and now they were here on her ship. Throughout the ship, the battle began. The crew fought with the desperate courage of people defending their home. They used mining lasers, plasma cutters, and sidearms against the Crawl warriors' advanced energy weapons and razor-sharp limbs. The corridors became a chaotic mess of flashing lights, shouted orders, and the terrible screech of metal tearing. Amanda, hearing the noise, grabbed a medkit and ran from her lab. Her first thought was for Leah. She had to get to her quarters. But as she turned a corner, she saw two Crawl warriors. They were tall and terrifying, their insectoid bodies moving with a jerky, predatory speed. They were cutting their way through a bulkhead door, their tools screaming against the metal. She ducked back, her heart pounding. She was trapped. A moment later, Kyle appeared from the other end of the corridor, his face smeared with grime, a plasma rifle in his hands. He saw her and the Crawl. He fired, the bright bolt of plasma striking one of the warriors in the back. It shrieked and turned, its multifaceted eyes glowing with rage. "Amanda, get to medbay," Kyle yelled, firing again to keep them pinned. But the Crawl were fast. One of them charged him, its bladed arm slicing through the air. Kyle dodged, but the creature was too close. It knocked the rifle from his hands and slammed him against the wall. The other Crawl turned its attention back to the bulkhead and then to Amanda, who was now cornered. It advanced on her, its weapons humming. Amanda backed against the wall, clutching her med kit like a shield. This was it. This was how she died. Then a sound came from the ventilation grate above, a low rumbling growl. The Crawl ignored it, focused on its prey. The grate exploded outward. A small gray shape dropped from the ceiling, silent as a shadow. It was Leah. She landed squarely on the back of the Crawl warrior that menaced Amanda. She was so small, so light, but her fury was immense. Her claws, sharp enough to shred packing foam, dug deep into the joints of the creature's armor, seeking the soft tissue beneath. Her teeth, her tiny needle-sharp fangs, sank into the base of its hard, chitinous neck. The Crawl shrieked in surprise and pain. It was an unthinkable attack. From a creature it had not even registered as a threat. It thrashed and spun, trying to dislodge the small predator clinging to its back. Leah held on, a knot of pure, feral determination. She was not fighting for territory or food. She was fighting for her pack. Her attack was a distraction, a precious few seconds of chaos. It was all Kyle needed. He shoved the Crawl, pinning him away, scrambled for his rifle, and took aim. But the Crawl holding Leah was flailing wildly. It slammed backwards, crushing Leah against the hard metal wall with a terrible, sickening crunch. Leah let out a sharp, pained yelp and fell to the floor, her body limp. A roar of pure, undiluted rage erupted from Kyle. He didn't aim. He simply pointed his rifle at the Crawl and fired again and again, until the creature was a smoking ruin on the deck. He then turned and did the same to the second warrior, his face a mask of cold fury. When the corridor was silent, he rushed to Leah's side. Amanda was already there, her hands trembling as she gently felt the cub's body. Leah was breathing, but each breath was a shallow, pained gasp. One of her back legs was bent at a wrong angle, and a dark bruise was already spreading across her gray fur. "Oh, Leah," Amanda whispered, tears in her eyes. "You brave, stupid, wonderful cub." Frank arrived then, his overalls stained with oil and something darker. He saw Leah on the floor and his face fell. He knelt beside her, his large, gentle hands carefully scooping her up. She was so small in his arms. "She's just a cub," he said. his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. But she's got more fight in her than a star dreadnought. The battle across the ship was winding down. The crew, fueled by a new burning anger at the attack on their youngest member, fought with a ferocity that drove the remaining Krall back to their ship, which then disengaged and fled into the void. But the victory felt hollow. In the medbay, Amanda and the ship's doctor worked frantically. Leah's injuries were severe: broken bones, internal bleeding. She was placed in a medical pod, her small form surrounded by glowing screens and humming machines. She was alive, but only just. The crew gathered outside, their faces grim. They had seen what she had done. She had not hidden. She had not run. She had seen her pack in danger, and she had attacked a monster 20 times her size. She had been willing to die for them. The story spread through the ship in hushed tones. They didn't call her the Cub anymore. They started using a different name, a title born of respect and awe. They called her the Unbreakable Hunter. She had proven that her spirit, the heart of a Cathar, was truly unbreakable. And they knew with a cold certainty that the Krall would be back. They had seen what Leah was, and they would not stop until they had finished what they started. The mood aboard the Odyssey's call was heavy and quiet. The only sound in the medbay was the steady, soft hum of the medical pod. Inside, Leah slept, her small body held in a state of suspended animation while it worked to mend her broken bones and internal injuries. A dark bruise still colored her fur, a stark reminder of the price she had paid. Amanda sat beside the pod, her hand resting on the cool glass. She had not left for more than a few minutes at a time. Captain Linda Perez stood on the bridge, staring at the star chart. They were running, but to where? The Krall knew who they were now. They had scanned the ship, they had seen Leah. The Krall were relentless hunters. They would not simply give up. "It's my fault," Kyle said, his voice flat. He stood beside the captain, his knuckles white where he gripped the railing. "I should have seen them coming. I should have protected her." Linda shook her head. "No, she made her choice. She protected you. She protected Amanda. We can't change that. All we can do now is figure out what happens next." The problem was they had nowhere to go. The official Earth authorities were weeks away, and might not even care about one alien child. They were on their own. Then something strange began to happen. Frank down in the engineering bay got the first hint. A message came through on a general civilian channel, tight-beamed from a nearby comms relay. It was from a freighter captain they had helped out of a jam years ago. "Hey, Odyssey's call," the gruff voice said. "Heard you had some trouble with the Krall. Heard about your little passenger. We're with you. Let us know if you need a distraction. The Starlight Runner stands ready." Linda was confused. How did they know? More messages started to trickle in. A mining guild on a fringe colony, an independent fuel hauler, a small planetary defense force from a world the Krall had raided. The story was spreading, passed from ship to ship, from outpost to outpost. It was the story of a human salvage crew who had found a child, the last of her kind. It was the story of the Krall, the bullies of the galaxy, attacking that ship and breaking that child. And it was the story of how that child, that cub, had fought back with breathtaking courage. Humanity on the frontier had a long memory and a deep-seated hatred for bullies. The tale of the Unbreakable Hunter ignited something in them. It wasn't about strategy or politics. It was about a child. It was simple. It was right. Linda saw the opportunity. She was not a military commander, but she was a leader. She started sending out coordinates, a rally point in a remote system. She didn't order anyone. She simply asked for help. The Krall hunter-killer ship arrived in the system exactly as predicted. It was a dark, angular vessel built for speed and killing. Its commander expected to find a single, damaged salvage ship trying to hide. He expected an easy hunt. What he found was a fleet. It was a ragtag makeshift navy. There were bulky freighters like the Odyssey's call, their mining lasers powered up. There were sleek, fast courier ships, their holds packed with explosives. There were a handful of aging but still powerful patrol frigates from a dozen different colonies. They were not a unified force. They were a mob, and they were positioned between the Krall ship and the Odyssey's call. On the bridge of the Krall ship, the commander hissed in confusion. This was illogical. Why would these inferior beings risk their lives for one another? The calculation of power was clear. He should win. On the bridge of the Odyssey's call, Linda took a deep breath. Open a channel to the entire fleet, and broadcast it to the Krall. The channel opened. She could see the faces of the other captains on her screen. Men and women from all walks of life united by a single idea. "This is Captain Perez of the Odyssey's call," she began, her voice steady. "They are here for one reason. They are here for a child named Leah. They think she is prey. We are here to show them they are wrong." Then she did something else. She did not play a rousing speech. She did not issue a battle cry. She nodded to her communications officer. A new sound filled the channels, echoing across the vacuum to every ship and into the ears of the confused crawl commander. It was an audio recording. It was the sound from the Odyssey's call corridor during the boarding action. First, there was the screech of metal and the zap of energy weapons. Then a low, determined growl too small to be a real threat. The sound of a small body impacting with a hard wall followed by a sharp, pained cry. And then, unmistakably, the roar of a human voice, Kyle's voice, filled with a grief and rage so pure it was terrifying, followed by the relentless blast of his plasma rifle. The audio ended, leaving a stark silence. On the crawl ship, the commander understood nothing. It was just noise, but on the human ships every person understood perfectly. They heard the bravery of the cub and the fury of her pack. It was a reminder of what they were fighting for. It was not for territory or for money. It was for a little girl who had tried to protect her family. The battle began. The crawl ship fired its powerful weapons, and a freighter on the edge of the human formation exploded into a silent fireball. But instead of breaking, the human fleet surged forward. They fought not like a military, but like a swarm. They were disorganized, but they were relentless. A mining ship used its heavy-duty tractor beam to lock onto the crawl vessel, holding it in place while smaller ships darted in, firing at its engines. A fuel hauler rammed a crawl missile, sacrificing itself to save a patrol frigate. They fought with a desperate, screaming courage that the crawl could not comprehend. For the crawl, war was a transaction. For these humans, it was a crusade. The crawl ship was powerful, but it was not prepared for this. Its shields flickered and failed under the constant, chaotic assault. A lucky shot from one of the patrol frigates hit its primary weapon array, causing a chain reaction of explosions that tore through its hull. The hunter-killer ship, wounded and bleeding atmosphere, turned. Its commander, finally understanding that the cost of this hunt was too high, ordered a retreat. It limped away, jumping into warp space, leaving the human fleet victorious. On the Odyssey's call, a cheer went up, but it was a tired, somber cheer. They had won, but they had lost people. They had seen friends die. Linda looked at the view screen, at the scattered, burning debris that was the price of their victory. They had sent their message. The crawl knew now that some things are not to be hunted. The Unbreakable hunter had a pack, and her pack was humanity itself. Silence returned to the void. The flashes of weapons fire were gone, replaced by the steady, distant glow of the stars. The battle was over. On the bridge of the Odyssey's call, the crew moved slowly, their movements heavy with exhaustion and loss. They had won, but the cost was written on their faces. They had watched other ships captained by friends and strangers who had come to help them, turn into fire and shattered metal. Captain Linda Perez let out a long, slow breath. She looked at the main screen, which showed the scattered fleet. Some ships were damaged. Others were gathering the few escape pods that had been launched. It was a victory, but it felt hollow and sad. "Open a fleet-wide channel," she said, her voice rough. When the light on her console glowed, she spoke. "This is Captain Perez to every ship that came. Thank you. You saved our lives. You saved her life. We will not forget this." She did not have any more words. None were needed. Down in the med bay, the soft hum of the medical pod was the only sound. Amanda was still there, her head resting against the cool glass. She had listened to the battle on the ship's intercom, her heart pounding with fear for her friends and for the future of the small life she was guarding. The pod let out a soft, musical chime. A green light began to pulse on its control panel. The healing cycle was complete. Amanda sat up straight, her breath catching. She watched as the preservative fluids drained away and the internal lights brightened. Inside, Leah stirred. Her golden eyes fluttered open. They were clear, no longer clouded by pain. She looked confused for a moment, looking at the white ceiling and the clear walls. Then her eyes found Amanda. She blinked slowly. Amanda pressed the button to open the pod. The seal broke with a hiss and the lid slid back. The air that escaped smelled of medicine and clean oxygen. "Leah," Amanda whispered. The small Cathar cub shifted. She pushed herself up onto her front paws. Her movements were slow, careful, but there was no sign of the terrible injury that had broken her body. She took a tentative step, then another, climbing out of the pod and onto the floor. She stood for a moment, testing her legs. She took a few steps towards Amanda, her gait steady and strong. Then she stopped. She lifted her head, her nose twitching. She sniffed the air. She could smell it. The sharp, acrid scent of plasma fire. The faint, terrible smell of ozone and burned metal that lingered after a battle. Her ears swiveled, picking up the faint sounds of damage reports and repair crews over the ship's intercom. She looked at Amanda, and in her intelligent golden eyes there was a question. Amanda knelt down. "It's okay," she said softly. "It's over. We're safe." "You're safe." But Leah understood more than just words. She understood the smells, the sounds, the tired look on Amanda's face. She remembered the fight. She remembered the crawl. She walked forward and gently pressed her head against Amanda's chest, a soft, rumbling purr vibrating through her small body. It was a sound of comfort, of reassurance. She was comforting Amanda. Just then, the medbay door slid open. Frank stood there, his overalls smeared with grease and a fresh bandage on his arm. Kyle was right behind him, his face tired but his eyes clear. They stopped when they saw Leah, standing on her own 4 legs, whole and healthy. Leah turned her head to look at them. She left Amanda's side and walked over to Frank. She sniffed his bandaged arm, then gently licked his large, rough hand. She then moved to Kyle. She looked up at him, and for a long moment they just looked at each other. He was the one she had tried to save. He was the one who had carried her broken body. He knelt down, and Leah butted her head softly against his shoulder, her purr growing louder. They were her pack. She was checking on them, making sure they were all right. Later, Captain Linda Perez came down. She smiled, a real, genuine smile for the first time in days, when she saw Leah moving freely around the medbay. "The doctor says she's fully recovered. Good as new." "What happens now, Linda?" Amanda asked, her hand resting on Leah's back. "Now," Linda said, "we have a choice. The crawler gone, but they won't forget, and we can't keep running forever." She looked at Leah. "But we're not alone anymore. That fleet out there, they didn't just fight for us. They fought for her. They represent a lot of people on a lot of worlds who believe in what we did." An idea was forming, a new purpose. The salvage life was over. They had stumbled into something bigger. Weeks passed. The story of the Unbreakable hunter and the ragtag fleet that defended her had spread to every human outpost. The Odyssey's call became a symbol. They were no longer just salvagers. They were the guardians of the last Cathar. They found a new home, not on a busy central planet, but on a quiet, green world in a system protected by the very same captains and colonies who had answered their call. It was a safe place, a haven. On this new world, under a warm yellow sun, Leah stood with her pack. Amanda, Kyle, Frank, and Linda were with her, looking at the rolling hills and dense forests. It was a world she could run in, a world where she could grow. Leah looked up at the sky, no longer a place of terror, but a place of freedom and future. She was still a cub. She would always carry the memory of her first family, the loss that had shaped her. But now she had a new pack, a vast and powerful family that stretched across the stars. They called her the Unbreakable Hunter, a title born from her courage, a legend that would inspire others. She was just a cub, but she was home. Her story was not ending. It was just beginning. She turned from the sky and bounded into the tall grass, chasing a flickering insect, her movements full of a grace and strength that promised she would grow into her name. The Unbreakable Hunter was finally truly safe.